Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our office hours special. We normally don't run office hours on Fridays, but this week we decided to make an exception because it's a special time of the year or a pretty unique time in the entire 4 years because it's World Cup time. And as you know, we built something really interesting, which is a World Cup results simulator. Some of you may be familiar with it. And Haroon, joining us today, agreed to tell us a little bit more about this entire project because he is ultimately the person and the brain behind this project. And it's a really interesting story of how it all came together. So, Haroon, over to you. Please tell us a little bit about this project, how you decided to build it, how it was built. And since it's a very lightweight, quick session, we're encouraging everyone who is tuning in to watch us to ask your questions. We're more than happy to go over them during this quick 25-30 minute session. So, Haroon, over to you. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Lena. Thanks for the introduction. That includes you, by the way. If you have any questions, please interrupt me because I have a tendency to talk too much and go perhaps sometimes too deep into the statistical weeds. So pull me out, please, if that's the case. Today, I'd like to kick off with just introducing a little bit what this project was for those who haven't seen it yet. So let me quickly share my screen. So for this World Cup, like 2 years ago, we, at Luzmo, we really like football. There's many football fans among the team, and we are a very international team. So that gives a very interesting dynamic of group matches or later matches in the World Cup that are being played by two countries where we both or where we have team members in those countries. So we like data as well, and we like using that data to actually try to predict who will win the World Cup, have a more evidence-based system for that. And so 2 years ago, we started with that with our Euro 2024 stats page, where we are extensively using flex charts to visualize all kinds of statistics about the two teams that are playing each other, but also built a predictive model that tries to predict individual game scores and provide some football commentary from our AI octopus. And we have this probability table. Of course, we can play it back to the beginning, where you can see the probabilities of each team reaching the finals and becoming champions. So at the start of the tournament, we gave France a lot of chances to actually win it. They didn't end up winning in the end. But yeah, it's an interesting way to visualize this. Now, for this World Cup, we prepared new predictions with a better model. So we did a lot of changes to the model itself, modeled additional parameters, calibrated the data better. Let me also open the chat so that I can actually see what is happening here. But what is different this time is that you can ask your own questions and change any parameter that is being used in this prediction and see what the results are. So, for example, we are in our base model. We are again forecasting France to lift the World Cup this year. This has actually changed since the beginning. Originally, we thought Spain would have the highest chances. Now they dropped to second after their slightly unexpected draw. But yeah, you can see here the table with a different probability. So we see France. We expect them. We give them about 16% chance to win the World Cup this year. Spain, about the same, just a little bit lower. England third, Argentina up next, and Belgium, which of course I have to include as a Belgian company. We give ourselves 2.3% chance of winning the tournament. Now I can change anything and predict the World Cup. So, for example, what if Belgium is distracted by the large amount of French fries consumed in the USA. And what we will do is translate this what if scenario into changes to any of the input parameters that we give to the forecasting model, and then rerun the entire forecasting model to change in real time our predictions. So in this case, when we are distracted by that, we approximately half our title chances overall. How does this work? That's what I want to explain a little bit today, but definitely try out this tool and build your own scenarios. You'll see the most surprising scenarios here. Those are the scenarios where we see the largest changes in ultimate outcomes versus the original baseline forecast. So this all starts with some data, like many of our data applications that you built with Luzmo do. And in this case, we actually changed the data sources for this versus the Euro simulations. In this case, we're using a commercial data provider, a football API, to gather a lot of information on the individual players that are selected in the national squads by all of the 48 countries participating who are qualified in this World Cup. So this involves number of passes that they have played, their pass accuracy, the number of saves versus number of goal attempts for goalkeeper positions, number of crosses, number of attacks, and scoring probabilities, etc. From the players' previous appearances in national games, but also in the leagues where they are playing. So many of the players coming from the Premier League, we grab that information. And that information is also weighted a little bit. So we give, for example, the large European leagues a little bit of a higher weight and estimate different positional scores for each of the players. So how good they are as a goalkeeper, as a defensive player, as an offensive player, etc. So that data is being scraped or being requested via a provider in this case, and that all goes into the model itself. Now, how does a typical football or similar other sports forecast work? So usually when you want to I'm going to quickly share tabs here. So usually when you want to estimate this kind of probabilities, like France, 18% of chances of actually winning the World Cup outright, now we need to somehow model that. And so a typical probability distribution might look like this. So a normal distribution, a Gauss curve, a bell curve, where you might have a uniform distribution, or something more like this, like a Poisson or exponential distribution. The problem with predicting an entire World Cup is that there is no statistical distribution that nicely matches everything that happens. Why? Because it's a sum of a lot of different statistical distributions, and the outcomes of individual games, the complex rules of how we decide who can actually proceed from the group stage to the knockout tournament. So it's essentially impossible to model that as a single statistical distribution and then calculate the final outcome for each of the teams. So what do we do instead? That is using a technique called Monte Carlo simulation. And the name comes from the casino. And the idea is similar. So you take or you start at the start of the tournament with the first match that is being played. So I'll scroll down a little bit to go to the next match that's being played today. So tonight, European time, we have USA against Australia. And that for that game, we derive this probability distribution. So we think USA has a 32% chance of winning, a 28.8% chance of a draw, and 39.2% chance of Australia winning. So how do we come to that number? This is based on a per match probability that we calculate, and that is coming from the strength of the players that we expect to play. So very simply put, for each of the players, we calculate how many minutes we expect them to be part of the team. We calculate their strength on the various positions that they are in. And then we essentially compare those strengths against each other. So for example, if we take the defensive rating of the USA, then we compare it to the offensive ranking of Australia and vice versa. And we do that in a way where a defense is as strong, or a chain is as strong as its weakest link, and the same is the case for defensive positioning in football. So we slightly weight the worst defensive player more. So one player who's significantly worse than the rest of the team will pull down the defense quite a bit. And on the offensive side, we see the other thing. One striker who's exceptionally good, think a Messi, can pull up the offensive side of an entire team and have a large impact. Oh, I'm just going to put off that sound. That timing there. And that gives us these statistics on the individual probabilities, and everything else from the calculation is coming essentially from these individual match probabilities. So what are we going to do? We are going to simulate the tournament. So in this case, we might do a simulation and decide that Australia is going to win. And we're also going to simulate an expected score line, so an outcome of the game. The how exactly that is being done is perhaps a little bit too detailed for this session, but there is some calibration of these values on previous matches and previous World Cups, where we see matchups of teams of similar strength, and then the expected outcomes and the expected number of goals that each side will score. So one of our tournament simulations might involve Australia winning here with, for example, 2-0. Then we have the Scotland-Morocco game. Here, Morocco might win, etc. And we do this 5,000 times in total. And that you see that, of course, one simulation might end up with Scotland winning the tournament outright. But if you repeat that entire tournament many, many times, you'll see that overall Scotland will not be in the finals in many cases. So by repeating that entire calculation many, many times, you're sort of approaching the true probabilities of each team actually winning the World Cup. That is, of course, if all of the assumptions that go into that modeling are correct, and there we'll get in a second. Are there any questions so far, Lena? Are you still with us? Oh, you're on mute.
There are no questions so far from the audience, but I do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is just to confirm. So this is connected to a live data source. So for example, like you mentioned, from the start of the tournament, certain probabilities changed based on existing results of the matches that already passed. Can you tell a little bit about how this is all set up?
Yeah. So indeed, there are the various sources of data that go in it are all changing as the tournament is being played, because we have outcomes of games that have already been passed, like Mexico, South Korea. Mexico won that last night with went 1-0. So that is a probability that doesn't need to be pulled anymore. So we can play each of the tournaments, for example, with a 1-0 being forecasted here. Of course, you can change these outcomes because of the layer that we added on top to change any of the probabilities. So you can ask questions like, what if South Korea would have won on June 19th with score XYZ? Yeah, go ahead.
And another question that I have is around the number of runs that you recommend making, because I played with it quite a bit. And I just got curious, if we're talking about some kind of statistical significance, if that's applicable, is there a minimum or recommended number of runs for simulation for me to get to a point where I can be reasonably confident about the accuracy of the prediction.
Yeah, you definitely can. So what you'll see happen is that if you look at each of the runs, so let's say you have your n runs here, 5,000 for example, what you'll see on your first run is that these probabilities will be like skipping around quite a lot, and then you'll see that it slowly approaches a certain threshold where each of the next runs is not really changing the probabilities anymore. And so you can look at a kind of delta here or an epsilon, where if you see that the rate of change for each of your next runs is small enough, then you can stop iterating, and you know that you have modeled your probabilities well. That means that you have estimated with that Monte Carlo method the probabilities within your model correct. Of course, your model can still be entirely wrong.
Makes sense. And just a quick call for everyone watching us. I see there are a few people watching us on LinkedIn Live and some here on the Riverside platform. So don't hesitate to ask your questions in chat. We're happy to address them right now or can catch up on them once Haroon goes through his explanation and presentation. And with that, back to you, Haroon. Let's continue.
Thanks. Of course, I wanted to share this graph that I was drawing, where you see these probabilities approaching a certain fixed stage. So you'll see the changes drop off, become smaller and smaller. Okay. Of course, you still need to decide what kind of data that you are going to model. And here we made some steps versus the previous Euro predictor. And so we are looking at the team strengths, and this is typically based on something like the FIFA ranking or another ELO-based rating. ELO is a system that's used or coming from the chess world, where you're looking at relative strengths and looking for each game that's being recorded between national squads. Who's winning and whether that is expected or not. So a win against a very low-rated opponent is weighted a lot less than, for example, losing against someone who's very overpowering versus you. And then we're looking at a lot of the player data. We discussed that. What we're also including this year is injury data. So players can get injured. Some players are injured even at the start of the tournament, and that is being modeled. And then any of those things can be adapted by you as you are making scenarios. Because this World Cup is being played over a very large area, then there's a lot of flying involved. And there are differences in how the groups have been set up with the playing city. So we see very big differences from team to team in the amount of miles that they have to travel and the number of rest days between their games. And especially also Mexico City, where some of the games are being played, is lies at more than 2,000 meters of elevation. There's a lot less oxygen in the air there. So it's harder for players to play there, especially if they are not conditioned to higher altitudes. So that's why we are also taking into account the altitude factors. Heat is expected to be an important factor, so that's also something that we are modeling. And then we are doing things like fatigue and morale, where playing very high intensity games, we expect that fatigue to build up over time. Rest days reduce that fatigue a little bit, but might not be entirely gone for the next game. And the morale is, of course, very important in a tournament like this. This year, there are 48 teams, more than ever before. It adds an additional game. So I think the tournament is now 8 or 9 games for each team. At least the team that wins will have to play that many times. And so winning in a very contested way, or drawing against a worse opponent, that will all affect the morale of the players and might carry on to the next game. So these are factors that our model just takes into account for each of these 5,000 simulations, and for each new simulation, they are then reset. And yeah, we're just pulling along those values and changing the probabilities that are coming out of this. Final part that I definitely want to touch upon is the what if part, because everything I explained is true for every football prediction tool or probability ranking. They might choose different parameters, they might choose different input data, but the gist of it is essentially the same, whether Opta does that or Luzmo calculates that data. What is unique here is that you can change any of those things. And how does it work? So we have our baseline simulation. That means all the standard player data that's coming from the API, all the standard locations where each team has their base and where they are training, and the altitudes of the stadiums, etc. We have the standard calendar of all the games being played, and we have a list of standard constants that are used in the model. Things like how much fatigue builds up for each 1,000 kilometers of travel that they have to do, or how much fatigue is being reset for each rest day that a team can have. And we chose well-calibrated values for each of these so that the probabilities of this are well-calibrated for previous World Cup. So we are very confident this is a reasonable forecast if everything stays baseline. But instead of just fixing all of this, we see it as inputs to the model. And so versus last time, we moved to a Rust-based calculation engine that can run those 5,000 simulations very fast. Like within 2 seconds, we can run 104 games, 5,000 tournaments, and with all of these factors that are being calculated. And that means that it's fast enough to actually put into an interactive loop like this one. Technically, how does this work? So we are using LLMs, of course, for this part. And we have built a simple agentic system that has a number of tools available to actually run these simulations. So first one can translate a question into a number of what we call scenario patches. So we're not going to let the LLM regenerate all of the data of all of the players. We're just letting it generate a change set, like Messi's offensive ability should be halved, or in the case of this one, where we forbid every team except the USA from scoring, we might reduce the offensive rating of all of the teams to 0, or we might be setting all of the games where the US plays to a 5-0 outcome for the US. And that change set is then applied to the original data. And then all of the data is being fed into the Rust-based forecast engine to calculate the results. Those results come back, and we give them to an LLM to compare with the original outcome of the baseline scenario, so that the LLM can actually, from those two large sets of outcomes, all of the games, all of the probabilities, and come up with a storyline. Like, we see that especially the chances of the USA have increased, and the largest loser versus the baseline scenario might be Spain, because they were the original candidate for a win. And then finally, we can let the agent also answer questions about all of the data that it has access to. So for example, we have these buttons here, or I can ask questions like, which games shift most? And here we are looking at the forecast, and so we see that the standout changes here are the games that the USA is involved in: USA versus Canada, USA versus New Zealand, USA versus Uruguay. And that system also allows you to just ask what changed, and it can just look at the data. So we changed the forecast by forcing every team except USA to score 0 goals in their matches. So that this is not special logic to explain you what changed. The LLM just has access, or the agent has access to all of those different change sets, can compare them and just answer your question directly. So you get functionality essentially out of the box by choosing a good set of tools to give your agent the capabilities to answer these kind of things. Any questions on that, Lena?
Mute again. Not really, but one call out to the audience as well, because we are probably here for another 5-7 minutes. If you have questions about your own data, maybe there's a data set that you want to visualize this way and you want to have a tip or recommendation how to do this better, I think it's a good time to ask this question. And in the meantime, Haroen, I will let you wrap up.
Yeah. So you might ask, why is this relevant for me? And here I have the following answers. So I think in a lot of industries, a lot of data that might feel more boring than this exciting story. There's a lot of ways to use that data in a more interesting way to make it more lively for your customers and let that data become more valuable, perhaps something that even that they're willing to pay for. So the technique of Monte Carlo simulation is very broadly applicable. So you could think, for example, of even if you don't have a predictive type of model, what is very interesting is to if you have a data set and a kind of formula or a calculation that leads to another result, is to slightly fluctuate that input data. Just apply small modifications to it and put a small probability distribution over these values, and then see what kind of shifts that gives into an outcome. So it's a sensitivity analysis, if you may, that can build more trust in the data. It can give an idea of how sensitive an outcome is versus small fluctuations in the input data. So, for example, the input data might not be entirely accurate, and there are measurement errors everywhere. It can show you if those are destructive for your end result, or if your end result is actually pretty, defensive against such changes. And you can give a better probability bracket instead of a final outcome that might not be exactly on the mark and reduce trust of clients in the data. It's typically better to acknowledge uncertainty in the data than it is to try to hide it or pretend that all of the data is perfectly accurate and perfectly trustable. But in many cases, it's also interesting to try to forecast or predict with data, and forecasts can be very not using outer aggressive forecasts that just predict a value based on the previous values. In many cases, model-based forecasts like this one, where there's an actual calculation and certain factors that you want to take into account for the calculation have a certain effect. Can be a very useful feature to build out, and it's not difficult to do. And we here for this World Cup simulation, we had an end-to-end time of ID to completely working a final version of, I think, 5 days or so. So this can be set up very quickly with the data that you already have.
Yes, this was actually the question that I also wanted to ask you, how long it took you to put this together. So you're saying about 5 days for a data set as extensive as this one. So this is helpful. And then in terms of the size of the data set, because I imagine that some of our customers watching would be curious if there is a certain threshold that their data needs to meet to be a good fit for such a simulation, where you can make pretty much any data set work for something like that from your perspective?
I think there's interesting things to do even with very small data sets, so that doesn't require a lot of data, and that's the beauty of Monte Carlo methods. That you essentially scale up the usefulness of your data by putting a small model or a calculation behind it, so that you don't need a ton of data to actually estimate the probability directly.
Yeah, that sounds really encouraging. So it means that you can build a customer facing dashboard or even a mini project like this with pretty much any data set that you have in your product or any open data set that you can play with if it makes sense and complements your product and the experiment that you want to run.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I want to leave just a couple of minutes for folks to ask us question in case they have them. But other than that, I also want to share that I think it's a fun project as well because after running it, we started sharing it with our customers and some news outlets, and this was picked up by a few publications. And I think this is another example of how you can turn a data set into an interesting reason to for your brand to be mentioned by others, and it gives a really good reason for your customers to interact with your product. So definitely an interesting use case, and if this is something that you want to try and build yourself, let us know. We'll be more than happy to help recommend the best approach. Maybe some last quick thoughts or remarks, Haroon, on your end.
No, I think you captured that very well. I just want to repeat again. I think there's often a lot of usefulness in data that is not clear immediately from a data set itself. Doing some small operations on it, transforming it, predicting stuff with it, but also, for example, benchmarking data. So very often we have as a platform for visualizing data, we often see filtering of that data. So each client, of course, can only see their own information, and that's obviously a good thing. However, there's a lot of there's a lot of interest or a lot of value in being able to benchmark your data versus an anonymized, aggregated subset of the data of the others, for example. And this is something that people find very valuable if you do it in a secure way. Uh, and yeah, that can elevate the usefulness of your data, and perhaps get people to pay for that service, for example, by adding their own data to the mix.
Thanks, Haroon. This was super interesting to take a sneak peek behind the scenes how this World Cup simulator was made. And we encourage everyone to check it out if you haven't done this yet. You can run infinite simulations, you can come up with unpredictable scenarios, and we're very curious to see what results you get. So share them with us on social media. You can tag us on LinkedIn. We're looking out for all of those comments. And it's also a fun link to share with your coworkers and your friends, especially if you come from different countries or support different football teams during this tournament, because we've seen quite a bit of fun exchanges with people teasing each other and running various predictions. So hope you have some fun with it. Enjoy the World Cup, and thanks again, Haroon, for finding the time to walk us through the behind the scenes of this World Cup simulator.
No problem. And yeah, looking forward to see which simulations you'll be doing.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
There may be an issue with the Riverside, so we're still live. At some point, we will be able to stop the live stream. So just bear with me here. And maybe in case you're still with us, you have a unique chance to ask one last question.